You can all put down your coffees, you won't need them. We're about to fire it up in here and jump into some of the most controversial aspects of the bilateral relationship. Just kidding. We're actually about to explore a path for collaboration on some of the most critical issues in the bilateral relationship, and that involves stimulating innovation in the innovation ecosystem for the life sciences. I'm Patrick Kilbride. I'm the U.S. Chamber's Senior Vice President for the Global Innovation Policy Center. Very pleased to be working with my colleagues at the U.S.-India Business Council to promote U.S.-India dialogue on intellectual property and innovation. I'm thrilled to be joined this afternoon by the Joint Secretary for the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade within the Government of India, Joint Secretary Himani Pande. Welcome. We have John Cabeca, who is the Intellectual Property Counselor for South Asia for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, based at the U.S. Embassy in Delhi. And we have Stephen Ezell, who is the Vice President, Global Innovation Policy at the Information Technology Innovation Foundation, or ITIF, one of the leading lights in Washington on innovation. And we're here because the United States and India have been two of the most critical leaders anywhere in the world in delivering solutions to unmet medical need. They have together made sure that we have new treatments and increasingly cures available to all of us, and they've made sure that they're reaching every corner of the world. That's never been more important than today for reasons that we're all painfully aware. So I'm going to ask this panel to explore what's next for the United States and India. And we're going to begin with the Joint Secretary, who steps into a role of incredible importance, overseeing the administration of intellectual property rights in India, and an opportunity to really set the course for what looks to be a very bright future. So, Joint Secretary, we'd love to hear your opening remarks.
Thank you, Patrick. India started on an innovation journey not as recently as 2016, which most people think about from the National IPR policy, which was released in 2016, but much earlier. I think Patent Act goes back to 1970. But the fact does remain that a lot of impetus to the patent ecosystem came through after the IPR policy. And essentially, we worked on 7 pillars: creating awareness and outreach, where we've reached out to not only school students through including the IPs in the school curriculums, but also through a national awareness mission called NIPAM, by which we've reached out to almost 3,600 colleges, as well as about 10 lakh students across the country. And we have established Spriha chairs in various centers of higher learning, through which pedagogy as well as research in patents is encouraged, and this is a grant-based system that is there. The second pillar that we worked on was on generation of IPs. Now that is something which has really moved the wheels for us, because if you look at 2016 when the policy just came out, that time we were nowhere within the top 10. But if you look at 21 and 22, we've breached the top 10 in not only patents, but also in trademark filings in both. And we've reached the 6th position in patent filings and 4th position in trademark filings. Apart from that, it's been a really aggressive journey with a lot of movement forward. And not only in terms of filing of patents, but also granting of patents or granting of trademarks, where there's been a tremendous rise. For example, in patents, we find that if the filings increased 2-fold from the time the policy came out, the patent grants increased 6-fold. So the pendencies have been reduced to a large extent. We are working very aggressively on that to reduce it even further. And interestingly, what we find is that in the startup ecosystem, the generation of IPs is even faster. Filings are even faster. So the filings in startups and patents has increased by over 10-fold. So that's something which we are very keen to in terms of having a very robust ecosystem in terms of new technologies coming in. The third area for our focus was on legislative reforms and regulatory processes, where we've had almost a continuum of reforms which has taken place over reforming the rules, amending the patent laws, amending rules, the copyright rules, the trademark rules, as well as ensuring simplification, expedited grants and filings, and also looking at fee reductions, which have really helped MSCs, startups, and also where women directors were in place. So we've had, again, I think these are the measures which have helped not only increase the number of filings, but also especially if you look at filings from women's side. The other issue was strengthening our own IP offices per se, so increasing the online management systems which are there, the management of information systems, increasing the manpower, because that has been a really crucial area for us. So creating posts, putting place people, training them continuously, capacity building of the staff itself. Then the other pillar would be commercialization, where we looked at working with various technology transfer organizations, working with various incubators, and working with NRDCs, where we've had a lot of licensing agreements taking place. Apart from this, we've also worked on capacity building and helping people in applying for patents. So we've empaneled various patent agents, trademark agents. We pay them a fees through the government so that it ensures that there is more and more filing and they are able to help people who are applicants of patents and trademarks to go in ahead. So those are the kind of ways in which we are trying to reach out to applicants, to work with applicants, and to ensure that we have a much more robust filing and processing system.
Thank you. You know, you and I were speaking earlier, and I think you noted that the percentage of patent filings in India by Indians had continued to increase, by a large amount over the years, and it's great to hear that women inventors are also filing in much greater numbers. You know, John, as the U.S. government's representative in Delhi, what do you see as the opportunity here for us to collaborate, and where are we headed?
Thanks, Patrick. And I just want to start off by thanking USIBC for bringing us together. We were questioning Joint Secretary Pande ji and me had just arrived in India, from India yesterday. So right now it's about 1 o'clock in the morning for us. So, so we're questioning putting this on at a late in the afternoon for us. No, very excited. I do want to share that we've had a presence, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office has had a presence in India now since 2005, and working very closely, not just with the Indian government and with DPIIT and the IP office, but all of the government agencies, at the central, state, local level that might have equities on intellectual property. So we've really been building a strong partnership and a strong basis of trust in working with each other on exchanging views and sharing best practices and understanding each other's systems. And at the same time, like while the U.S. IP system, according to the IP Index, is the #1 IP system in the world, it doesn't mean that we are sitting on our laurels and we've stopped continuing improving our system. In fact, that we constantly take steps to ask our stakeholders, where can we improve? What are areas that we should focus on? What legislative amendments should we make? What can we fix by guideline or rule, and things like that. And that's one thing that building that trust with our users of our system has, I think, helped us tremendously. And I have to say, just in the short 3 years that I've been in India, I've seen the IP office and through DPIIT take similar steps in meeting with stakeholders. There's now the IP Manthan that the Controller General for the IP office does weekly, I believe, to get feedback and to start collecting this information to see what are things that can be done as quick fixes, what are things that can that need a change of regulation and what needs to be put further off into some sort of legislation. So I think it's very promising to see that kind of work. And I think a lot of that is, as a result of, how strong our partnerships are with each other, and through, for example, we just recently held, just a few weeks ago, held a program with the IP office on post-grant oppositions, on some more of the complexities that relate to operations and administrative oversight of an IP office, and sharing some of our experiences on the way, some of the pitfalls that we've seen along the way as well in our own efforts to advance our system. And so I think by sharing these experiences with each other, we're helping each other in growing our systems going forward. And so that's just one of the 3 pillars of the work that I do, is this close government-to-government work.
It's great to see professionals working together and sharing those types of insights and experiences. And one of the things that Ambassador Atul Kashyap, the head of the U.S.-India Business Council here at the Chamber, always talks about is trust. How important trust is to the relationship, to commercial markets. I think that is especially true in the innovative and creative sectors, where they face a level of technical risk of doing something brand new, and political risk of some of the uncertainty that in much of the world surrounds intellectual property. And it's only through building trust that we can address that. John, just a couple hours ago, Senator Warner was, I think, sitting in the same chair you were, and he was asked by the Chamber's Neil Bradley, what more should we be doing in industry? And the senator's answer was more of this, more dialogue. And so I think one of the things that we're exploring with US IBC, with our local partners in the Indian industry, and with both our governments, is to see whether we can convene an IP dialogue in India this year to address some of these cutting-edge issues. Stephen, one of the issues that's top of mind for all of us, and we saw this especially through the pandemic, is what we call IP commercialization. That is, the realization of an end product from an advancement in knowledge or a technological development. These brilliant ideas do no good unless they reach someone. What's the secret sauce?
Well, thanks, Patrick, for the question and the kind invitation from yourself and US IBC to participate today. It's very difficult to achieve innovation without the protection of ideas. And that is why robust intellectual property rights are so important, so that innovators who undertake the risky, expensive, difficult, uncertain process of trying to bring something new into the world can capture a share of the value they create for society for at least a brief period of time. Patrick, in 2014, there were only an estimated 720 startups in all of India. But according to a recent study, India now has the world's 3rd largest startup ecosystem, with over 90,000 startups and an estimated 110 unicorns with a combined $350 billion in market cap. And in my mind, there's no doubt that part of the change since 2014 has been the introduction of more robust IP rights that we have just heard about in India. And going forward, how do we get more IP commercialization from both the US and India? If you ask me what has been the secret sauce of the US innovation system in modern times, it has really been that we have turned American universities into engines of innovation. Today, at least 40% of US universities have a formal startup incubator or accelerator attached to the university. And this is helping students and faculty launch their ideas and technologies into new startups. And so catalytic to that ecosystem has been a law we introduced in 1980 called the Bayh-Dole Act. This was legislation that gave universities and research institutions the rights to the intellectual property stemming from federally funded R&D. Universities can then transfer this technology to startup companies. And this is why, if you look today at the US life sciences ecosystem, 7 of 10 companies with drugs in stage 3 clinical trials are actually small companies, often receiving IP licenses from US universities. This impact of academic technology transfer licensing has led to the formation of 13,000 startups in the US over the past 2 decades, 100,000 patents, and nearly 300 new drugs. So Patrick, as you explore opportunities for greater US-India collaboration on IP, I think one pathway is exploring how we can unleash the power of smart students and faculty at universities to be engines of innovation.
Thanks, Stephen. And Joint Secretary Pande, I think it's long been recognized that India has some of the strongest research universities in the world. But like all of us, commercialization is a struggle. And you know, Stephen outlined some of the success of the U.S. system, but I think we definitely don't take it for granted. We recognize, you know, that valley of death between knowledge advancement and practical application, where so many good ideas wither on the vine. And what can you say about India's process? What's the state of IP commercialization in India today, and what do you think we can do to improve it?
So just to add on to what Stephen said about the university systems and the research labs, in India we have about 150 central research labs and about 1,000 universities. And, but they all follow a fairly heterogeneous IP regime, in the sense that though IP prosecution would be centralized to the CSIR IP policy and technology transfer, but in terms of licensing arrangements and technology transfers, it would be left to the individual institutions concerned. But over the years, there has been a lot of strength which has got added to the system. We have various departments that are concerned with this, like the Science and Technology Department, or the Department of Biotechnology, the CSIR, the ICR, ICMR, so a lot of labs across the country. And we have, in the past 20 years, we have now about 326 incubators established, which is almost like a 20-fold increase. I know it looks a little small because I was talking about 2 decades almost, but that's the kind of effort which is going in towards establishing incubators. About 26 of our higher education institutions have very robust technology transfer offices, which deal with sponsored research, spin-off creations, and IP related activities. Apart from this, we also have established about 34 TISCs, that is Technology Innovation Support Centers. Now these, of these 34, 22 were sanctioned this year. So that was a big jump for the IP ecosystem per se. Out of this, if I'd like to mention just 2 of them. NRDC Visakhapatnam established 5,000 licensing arrangements and technology transfers for almost about 37 odd technologies. Then the Punjab TISC, that ensured collaboration with 900 brick kilns for a hybrid modern brick kiln technology, earning about $21.7 million. So that's the kind of partnerships that we are looking at. Apart from that, we also have innovator networks through Agni, which is overlooked by the Prime Minister's scientific advisor, as well as AgriNet through the Agriculture Department, which connects innovators all through the country for sharing of innovations.
Yeah, thank you. You know, on an earlier panel, I think it was Hari from Jubilant Pharmaceuticals in India who was talking about the vibrancy of the innovation ecosystem. And, you know, India has long been known as the generic pharmacy of the world, but increasingly, you know, I think we all see opportunity in the innovative pharmaceutical space. John, as you have conversations with the Indian government, with U.S. stakeholders, what do you see as some of the sort of compelling issues that we can address together?
So it's a good question. So I think I just want to share, as I've been here all day, and I've heard the word innovation in every single speaker and panel that has been here throughout the day. And a couple of them dropped the intellectual property, so it was nice to hear that when we hear about IP, at least in my world. But generally, IP is not the forefront of so much of our efforts. And so we see through a lot of our multilateral partnerships like the Quad and other partnerships like ISET and the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum and many other fora, where we're looking to advance technologies, looking to improve innovation. And even though intellectual property isn't an explicit part of any of those fora, it's very clear that intellectual property protection is something that's very front of mind in the researchers, in the innovators that are creating new products, new solutions to help solve many of the problems that are kind of the underpinnings of these groups being formed in the first place. And so I do think there's a lot of momentum there. I think that the partnerships to, again, advance technology, support semiconductor growth, all of these things, intellectual property is going to play a tremendous role there. And I feel that that's something that we're just starting to see build as far as momentum. And kind of going back to the health question, we saw the same thing through the Quad partnership, throughout the pandemic, in the donations from innovative pharma through patient assistance programs, from USAID and other US government sources donating many vaccines and other therapeutics throughout the pandemic. And then at the same time recognizing that there needs to be this balance with supporting innovation at the same time as providing access through what we saw through voluntary licensing, through donations and things along those lines. So I see that they're maintaining that balance as a critical part and a critical need in our systems.
Thanks, John. And Stephen, when we talk about technology transfer, which is such an important part, I think, of commercialization, because we realize that innovation is rarely monolithic, right? It's not the government innovating by itself. It's not universities. It's not startups, although at all stages of the innovation life cycle, you're seeing very important contributions to innovation. But ultimately, it's the advancement of knowledge, the advancement of technology through diverse stakeholders within an ecosystem. What's the role of intellectual property in that process?
Well, innovation is really the creation of value for humankind. And, technology transfer becomes so important in that regard. One study from the World Bank found that, for developing countries, technology transfer was responsible for as much as 90% of the productivity growth in those economies. But it's more important, and so that means, for any economy, absorption of existing technologies is a key to productivity growth. But it's more about, turning all countries into engines of innovation themselves. So not just about technology transfer, but about creating the conditions that enable innovation in all countries to flourish. And intellectual property rights are so important because they give protections and they give security to innovators that they can capture or share the value that they create for a brief period of time. But as we look at the life sciences industry more broadly, this is the industry in the world where perhaps IP is most important. One study found that 80% of the value of US life sciences companies is in their intangible assets, particularly their intellectual property alone. 90% of US biotech firms are actually negative or pre-revenue because they're trying to invent new to the world things, which means the IP is the most important thing we have. And just on this point of technology transfer and the importance of IP, I think over the past 3 years, we have had one of the world's best case studies of the importance of intellectual property rights and patenting, and that was found in the COVID-19 pandemic. As a recent WIPO report called the COVID-19 Vaccines and Therapeutics Patent Landscape Report found, quote, patents played a central role in enabling the fastest development of vaccines in human history. So, but not just that. When you look at the nearly 400 vaccine partnerships and collaborations that have been established among manufacturers worldwide, 88% have entailed tech transfer and know-how sharing. And of the 140 collaborations for the production and distribution of COVID-19 therapeutics, over 92% involve some form of technology transfer. This has really been enabled by voluntary licensing agreements, which have given companies the ability to transfer the IP and know-how in a secure way, knowing that contract manufacturers will be able to manufacture vaccines and therapeutics in a safe and reliable basis. And that's led to the creation of over 200 production sites for COVID-19 treatments globally in more than 30 countries, including more than 70 in India alone. So just to point the point here, intellectual property has been vital not just to creating the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics that saved us in this crisis, but also to enabling the manufacturing at scale across the world through voluntary licensing agreements.
Stephen, I think what's interesting is that in the intellectual property debate, so often technology transfer seems to be talked about as if it was necessarily forced technology transfer. You know, like one company transmits the manual, you know, and you build it from the ground floor up somewhere else, you know, from whole cloth, as opposed to what, you know, at the Chamber, I think we see happening in the innovation ecosystem is an organic technology transfer that takes place throughout the ecosystem as, you know, researchers collaborate, as companies, you know, cross-collaborate through business partnerships. It's happening every day. It's embedded in the supply chains, the value chains. You know, you necessarily have to have an exchange of know-how in order to work together to deliver a product, especially a high technology product. And you know, what we see is that intellectual property provides a medium of exchange in the sense that, you know, it forces stakeholders to come to the table with a common understanding of the value that they each bring, and then they're able to do business together in a way that the private sector has to do. The same is true, you know, Stephen, you talked about pre-revenue biotech startups who have to go back to funders for round after round of capital raises just to stay in business long enough to get a drug into clinical trials that 9 times out of 10 is not going to ever reach a patient. But it's that IP ownership that allows them to raise the capital and stay in business. Joint Secretary, I wonder, how is IP licensing and technology transfer talked about and perceived in India today?
I think a lot of discussion has happened on that. There's been a lot of talk on Form 27, and we would certainly like where it's much more open and out in the open, whether it's available for licensing or not. That would certainly help. And apart from that, coming back to your previous question on universities and how that has helped in licensing and all. So even in universities, licensing arrangements, though heterogeneous, available at the level of the institute is encouraged, but it's mostly non-exclusive licenses which are preferred over there. But in terms of enforcement is what really Stephen was talking about. I think that is an area which is an area of concern for everyone, to how to protect those IPs. And that's where we are working together with enforcement agencies, whether it's customs, whether it's police, or even with the judicial officers. And it's been a continuous dialogue, training, capacity building, to ensure that there are more and more standardized manuals and toolkits which are available to all these agencies. We've recently had an IP bench which has been set up in the Delhi High Court, a second one at Chennai. So these are ways in directions to protect and enforce those IPs also.
Just by the way, that might be a place the US and India can learn from one another. I was recently dealing with officials from the state of Ohio, and they were commenting how each of the Ohio universities had a different licensing agreement. And that was frustrating some of the US companies that were having to deal in different ways with their universities. So the state of Ohio has now created a model licensing agreement for all their universities, which has streamlined the process. It might be a way we could learn from one another.
So I'll just share that that was basically the exact premise of a program that we did last month with NRDC that Joint Secretary mentioned, with DPIIT through the IP office was also present. And we brought in researchers across the Ministry of Science and Technology, from academia, experts from the US system to share how, through the Bayh-Dole Act you mentioned, how that helps to foster innovation, but then also to speak through different mechanisms, having someone from a major university with a successful tech transfer program talk about some best practices, and then have that dialogue with similar situated universities within India, talking about how they're handling their technology transfer. But I think you raise a good point. Many times, even though we're proud of our Bayh-Dole Act and it's created so much innovation, we still have very different technology transfer policies across universities here, much like India does. And I think that is one area where I think we've been at it a little longer. So we're helping to these universities, especially smaller universities, join forces to have a technology transfer network to help them with dealing with technology transfer and things like that. But I think there's still a lot that we can learn from each other on that front.
The Joint Secretary referenced non-exclusive licenses, and of course there's all sorts of licensing arrangements, right? Some are exclusive, some are non-exclusive, some are so-called voluntary. They're almost all contractual. They're really rooted in respect for the rule of law, which I think is so critically important to these innovative and creative sectors. As we think about India and its role globally, John, you, although you're based in Delhi, you work with 8 South Asian countries, and of course the Chamber's International IP Index measures 55 economies representing about 90% of global GDP, gives us an opportunity to have like-for-like comparisons. How do you see India's leadership role emerging? Does the United States try to foster Indian leadership in that sense? And where can we go together?
So we work very closely throughout the region. And I think both India and the United States work with the other South Asian countries in a bilateral way. But we also do come together for regional programs on, for example, we just did a program with 6 South Asian countries, including India, on customs and regulatory practices, and with experts from the US, all sharing experiences, industry sharing experiences, and each of the 6 countries' enforcement officials sharing experiences as well, so that again they can see the landscape throughout the region, see the different efforts underway throughout the region, and I think work collaboratively in trying to find the best enforcement mechanism that makes the most sense for each of those respective countries. So I think there's a lot to do there in that sense. I think throughout South Asia, clearly India is the most advanced as far as its IP system. Others throughout South Asia have different, there are different levels of even embracing an innovative culture and understanding what an innovative culture is, and some are much further along, some are still at an early stage. And so we're working with them across that and helping them create their first IP laws in some instances. So it really is a diverse system throughout the region.
I think, as the Joint Secretary suggested, India has been at this a while. You've got some experience. I think the National IPR Strategy from 2016 was a rallying point. It really helped to crystallize India's innovative future. Do you see India sort of lifting up the global South as an IP leader? It's a lot, I know.
Yeah, I think we are working in that direction, working very aggressively towards strengthening our IP ecosystem. And as I said earlier, we went from numbers and rankings which were way low down to now being in the top 10. And I think filings itself is important. And as I had talked to you earlier before, we started with domestic filings at about about 26% in 2016, and we've gone up to 53%. So I would see that as a lot of progress within the system itself, within the country itself. And and in terms of collaborations is what Stephen was talking about. We have very active collaborations with US research labs, also about 200 active collaborations ongoing right now itself. So we really hope to move forward. We've anyway, as you know, on the Global Innovation Index, jumped from the 81st position to the 40th position. So it's been a steep jump in over a period of 5 years, and we hope to move further ahead on that. Yeah.
Of course, we just announced the new framework for research partnerships to the NSF with India, and hopefully with the $500 million multilateral security development fund we have for semiconductors in the CHIPS Act, there will be an opportunity there to expand joint microelectronics research between the US and India.
Stephen, you referenced the NSF, the National Science Foundation, among many things it does, including supporting federal grants for research and development in a variety of cutting-edge technologies. One of the things that it does is track investments in research and development at various stages of the innovation life cycle and by the source of the funding. And one of the things that becomes obvious when you look at these figures is that the US government is the strongest supporter of early stage scientific research, although that percentage share has declined over several decades, and now it's about 31%. But as you proceed through the life cycle to applied science, to product development and testing, to commercialization, you see the private sector playing a much larger role. And in fact, across the whole R&D space, across the life cycle, private sector investment in R&D in the United States is about 75% of all spending. And arguably, and Stephen, I'd like to get your reaction to this, arguably that's because the reliability of the IP system mobilizes otherwise dormant resources. Can you talk just for a second about capital allocation? How do we inject that critical capital into the ecosystem?
Well, certainly there's a great complementarity between public and private investment in R&D, and nowhere more than the life sciences, where it's public R&D research into the basic mechanisms of like biochemistry that enables companies to identify biomarkers or drug targets that they can innovate against. So kind of public investment creates a platform of knowledge that enables private sector innovation. And then to your point, bringing in all elements of the capital markets, from venture capitalists for startups to robust financing systems like bonds for larger companies. I guess the key point there is that the reality is, especially as we try to create new to the world innovations for things humanity has never solved before, like pancreatic cancer or Parkinson's, it becomes ever more difficult and expensive to innovate. That's why the average cost of developing a new to the world drug is increased to $2.6 billion in a process that takes 14 years to get to. So these companies have to be able to secure the capital to invest against these hard drug targets, and they have to have IP protections so that they can, essentially capture a share of the gain so that they can reinvest in future generations of biomedical innovation.
Critical point, thank you. Joint Secretary, I want to give you pride of place for any final thoughts that you want to share, and then we're going to have a very special presentation to conclude the panel.
Thank you, Patrick. Just wanted to share with you that we are building on our IP ecosystem, strengthening it, and I know that there are certain concerns which have been raised over a period of time with us, but that's a continuous dialogue that we have, and I think we are moving in the right direction towards building in more efficiencies into the system and streamlining the system.
There's a famous comedy skit from the U.S. Saturday Night Live program, and the skit was called More Cowbell. Everyone in my generation in America will recognize it, but I think our more cowbell is going to be more dialogue, and that's what's going to work
Patrick,
for us.
Can I just say briefly, what does it mean to be a member of the G20? Being a member of the G20 doesn't mean that you're a member of the 20 richest economies in the world. It means that you're a country that accepts the responsibility to unleash the ingenuity of your population to create innovations that create value for humankind, and recognize that robust intellectual property rights are the critical framework to enabling that to happen.
That is the goal. Okay, in conclusion, I want to, we're going to invite someone up to the stage for an unveiling. I want to mention that the U.S.-India Business Center and the Chamber, U.S.-India Business Council and the Chamber work every day to convene and connect, to create the linkages that gives industry a voice with government, that helps government achieve its goals working with industry. And one of the special partners that we have in South Asia is the Asia Pacific Medical Technology Association, APAC Med. USIBC has worked with APAC Med to create a coffee table book, Transforming Healthcare Through Innovation in India. And I would like to invite our colleague, Ms. Joshna Ghoshal, who is the Enterprise Lead, Government Affairs and Policy India, and Global Lead for International Forums at Johnson & Johnson, and the Chair of the Make in India Task Force at APAC Med. So, Joshna, come on up, and we're going to present the coffee table book.